Good afternoon and welcome to Let's Grow Shopping. One of the things a busy gardener needs to really get a handle on is the cycling of matter around the garden, organic matter, and basically that's composting. And a great way of speeding up the composting cycle, as particularly for noxious weeds, is making your own liquid fertilizer. It really increases the fertility in your garden and the life. And this video is about the ways in which I'm doing that around the place at the moment. I started off just making weed tea in a bucket, but it kind of got a bit bigger than that, and so now we're using an IBC to make bulk liquid fertilizer. We've got worm wee and compost wee as well. So yeah, there's plenty of ways you can make absolutely A-grade fertilizer for your garden without having to go anywhere near a plastic bag or a store-bought product. I have just collected what is mostly a binful of trad, and I just can't bring myself to throw it directly in the compost. So my solution to that is to fill the bucket with water and let it rot for about at least probably 3 or 4 weeks, more like 6. So if I make sure everything's submerged, put something over the top, stop the light getting in. Here we go. Push it down in there. Essentially what I'm trying to do, I've got this old rubbishy lid. I haven't got a proper lid for that bucket anymore. But you just keep this somewhere quiet for a few weeks. It'll turn into green sludge, which is then fertilizer for the garden. But I will just throw it on my compost pile, and yes, it'll hopefully have killed everything in the trad, and a good way to remove a particularly noxious plant from your garden. And welcome to the comfrey tea brewer. This is, as you can see, just an intermediate bulk container, an IBC, with, I put a normal tap on, and essentially what I do is put comfrey tea bags in there, dip it in about 200 litres of water like a tea bag, and let it sit for a month, well, at least 6 weeks, let it brew. And then if we get down into it, this rope is attached to 2 bulk brewing tea bags. And so that comfrey's been in those bags in there for, I don't know, I can't remember when I did it, I should look that up. At least for maybe 3 months. And so it's just been brewing away and turning the water into nutrient weed tea. Oh, if it was weeds it'd be weed tea, but it's comfrey tea. So now I've got the hose going in there, filling it up to 1,000 litres, and I don't know if you can see that, but you can see the water level here on the side of the IBC, so I can monitor when that gets full. I use rainwater for just about everything on the garden, so all my taps around the garden are from tanks. Tap water contains all sorts of, fluoride and stuff to kill bacteria, to keep us well apparently. But it also kills bacteria in your garden, and essentially gardening is about promoting bacteria and all sorts of life that you can't see. So if you can use rainwater wherever possible for everything in the garden, that is the go. And what you're staring at now is the bags once they've come out. So I will, it's a bit of a messy business. So you can see I just tie the top with a piece of rope and chuck it in. Yeah, and that's what you get afterwards. So a beautiful sloppy mess. And this has been in here, I think it's been about a week. And you notice when I'm poking it, more and more bubbles come out. That's a great sign. It's all bacteria doing their job. Lots of they're producing lots of gases, and everyone's happy. Now, if that was black, mucky, really, really stinky stuff, there'd be no bubbles coming out, and yeah, it's anaerobic and going pretty awful. And if it was anaerobic, I'd just put it in a wheelbarrow and mix it in with more water and expose it to oxygen, so it becomes aerobic again, and everyone's happy. My permaculture mentor, Brett Cooper, had this saying on our course, and I hope I get this right. Not all anaerobic bacteria is bad, but all bad bacteria is anaerobic. So not everything that is anaerobic is bad for you, but anything that is going to be bad for you is going to be anaerobic. So if you keep it aerobic, you are pretty much guaranteed there's no bad stuff in there. And the bubbles are a great sign. And it smells like there's a very different smell between the sulfur of anaerobic and the manure smell of aerobic. And that's how you tell the difference, essentially. If it smells of rotten eggs, you've got anaerobic and you need to do something about it. If it smells of fields on a summer's day after the farmer's been round with the horse and the cow poo, then you know you're on the right track. And this is amazing compost ingredients. Once it's broken all down, like you're fermenting weeds essentially. So you're putting bacteria into the compost. It's great stuff. Cool. Let's get on with the bulk watering. And there's the goop in the compost. And a side note to this is, don't get it on you. If it gets on your clothes, it is notoriously difficult smell to get rid of. Okay, we are ready to go. This tank is full to the brim of plant go-go juice. I've got the hose attached to it. However, the pressure is terrible because it's such a long hose. I've had to put two hoses together to get to the front verge. And yeah, the friction on the inside of the hose means the pressure or the volume of water coming out the other end is minuscule. You can see that it should be gravity fed because the level of the bottom of the tank, you can see the end of the road there through next door's gate. It's about level with that end of the road. So the top of my tank, which is, you know, up here, should be able to gravity feed. But the length of hose makes that a real issue. It took me a while to succumb to this, but I ended up buying a puddle jumper pump. And how this works is, you put this in you put this bit in the bottom of the tank. This float that I'm holding obviously floats, being a float. And while that float is up there, or even there, the pump works. But when it's down here, the pump turns off. There's a ball inside. If you can hear that clunk, that's the ball inside turning it off. So it can deal with fairly mucky water. So the water comes in at the bottom in these inlets and gets pumped out via this. So I hook a hose up to that, drop the whole lot at the bottom of the tank, and obviously it comes out the hose at the other end. And so that provides me a bit of pressure to get the water to the far reaches of the garden. Where I can, I use gravity, but obviously the furthest bits, I need some assistance. Righto, we have the pump up at the top of the tank. You can maybe see the water level in the tank is right at the top. I've got the hose connected to the pump. This webbing is so that I can drag the pump out again when it's finished. I don't really want to have to go fishing around for it in the bottom of here. There's no real way of getting in it. So you just drop it in and feed all this cable in, down, and there it's hit the bottom. Clunk. I can't see it, but as long as the float's above the pump, it works. Now the only thing I've got to do is plug it in. With these pumps, they don't have an on-off switch apart from the plug. So once you've plugged it in, if your plug's got an on-off switch, there's the switch. But as soon as I plug it in, off it goes. There's a nice long lead on the pump for the power cable, so you don't have to get the power supply anywhere near where you're plugging it in, so you don't get wet. And then when I plug it in, you should hear, there we go. Right, so we're off and racing. Now let's follow the hose. And there you go. That's a bit more like it. We can hose the garden. Oh, just getting rid of a bit of the air. And we're off. Again, life in the slow lane. This takes a while to empty 1,000 litres with a 12mm hose. But that's what we're here for, to enjoy the scenery and take in what's in the garden. So while I'm hosing this in, I'll just say a little bit about weed tea in general and how good it is. So when it's liquid fertiliser like this, it's in a plant available form, so the plants can drink it straight away, unlike solid fertiliser, which have to be converted to a form the plants can take it up. So obviously with water based stuff, plants can ingest water through their roots containing all these minerals that are in the weed tea. Which brings me around to the minerals that are in the weed tea depend on what you put in the weed tea in the first place. On the whole, they're they're quite nitrogen rich because you're using a lot of leafy greens most of the time. If you're using comfrey leaves are full of the minerals. Like I said, it's a bioaccumulant, so it accumulates minerals in its leaves, which then go into this weed tea. You could use seaweed, which is a great, amazing ingredient to put in a weed tea or a liquid fertiliser. The legal limits in Sydney, I think it's like a 10 kilo bucket per person per day. It might be more, it might be 20, but from what memory, if you just take a bucket down to the beach and fill it with seaweed and add it to your comfrey in your weed tea, you're laughing. You can use things like bananas are full of potassium, so you're getting a bit more potassium in your weed tea. So it just depends on what you put into it. If you do, diversity is probably the key. So if you're putting a diverse range of ingredients in there, you're getting lots of different minerals. The other great thing about it is you can use it, I'm trying to get this in the shot, as a foliar spray. So it's great for the leaves as well. So if you're going to actually eat those leaves afterwards, you need to rinse them off. But it does the plant a lot of good to have liquid fertiliser on the leaves. Another good point about weed tea is never feed a thirsty garden. So I've had the drippers on out here this morning for half an hour, so that there's already water in the soil. If I'd let this get parched for a couple of days and this was the first thing I was giving it after, when everything's really thirsty and needs a drink, that's not the best. And I don't think I mentioned before when I was filling the IBC up, the reason I only fill it to 200ml with the comfrey sort of concentrate tea and then fill it up to 1,000 litres with water is that you want to dilute this stuff down. If you use the ratio 10:1, you'll be on the right lines. I know 200 to 1,000 is only 5:1, but I'm not putting much comfrey in for 200 litres of fertiliser, so it's not as concentrated as, say, filling a bucket and then filling. If you fill a bucket full of weeds and then fill the bucket full of water, there's a lot more organic matter in there compared to the volume of water, and so you need to dilute that down 10:1. And so with that bucket, you just somehow decant the water off and leave the sludge. And yeah, if you put a litre in the bottom of a 10-litre watering can and then fill it up with plain water, you're good to go. And here we go, most of the garden watered and the pump cut out. You can see like it gets pretty close to the bottom, and then I just gravity feed the rest to the low part of the garden, slowly but surely, and we are done. One thing I do when it's all over is just flush the pump out. So the pump, I just fill a 20-litre bucket full of clean water so that there's no green goop clogging up the pump's insides. Yeah, you can see that the float is all dangling down. It's all plugged in. If I lift the float up, there you go, pump comes on, and you should be able to see the water just drain out the bucket pretty quickly. Yeah, and once they get pretty low, just turn it off. Done. So to make the tea bags, we need some comfrey and a bucket. And luckily, here's some I prepared earlier. So I'm literally just ripping leaves off and filling the bucket. Now if you can see with comfrey, there's always some shoots coming through. Fine, and it's coming up to spring and summer. As long as you keep it moist, it carries on growing. You can butcher it till the cows come home. Once we have a bucket full of comfrey, I'll just put half a bucket in each one of these bags. And that's it with the rope. So I just hook that to the top and they dangle in, and I'll just show you, got like a slip knot arrangement underneath that knot, so that if it's always tugging up, it can't come off. The last thing you really want to be doing is fishing around for one of these in the bottom of that IBC, and you don't want all the comfrey coming out, because cleaning the IBC will be a nightmare afterwards. And there it is. I'll just put some water in there and that'll be fine. I think you can see on there 200 litres. Well, it's more like 250 actually, I left it a bit long. No matter. I'm going to leave that for at least 6 weeks and we're good to go with comfrey tea again. Two other ways of liquid fertilising that I'm doing continuously are worm wee and the compost wee. And I'll just show you the worm wee and what I do. So I've got it set up high up so I can put one of these 15-litre containers underneath that catches the wee. I always have the tap open, never shut the tap. We pour our kitchen scraps in the top. Worms break it down. So every time I empty, we use one of these kind of yogurt pots on the kitchen bench to collect worm scraps in. And yeah, every so often we have to empty it. When we empty it, I go to the tap or my first flush from the gutters and fill it. I rinse the bucket out essentially, but I fill it and do that twice. So I'm flushing out the worm farm with that's a 2-litre bucket, so 4 litres of water every time I do it. So that's at least probably twice a week. We got two worm farms going, and I'm getting 2 containers, 15 litres each, full of worm wee. So if you do that with if I was diluting that 10-to-1, one of them 15-litre containers is 150 litres of liquid fertiliser, and spreading that around the garden all the time. I've just taken the top off that worm farm to show you that, underneath the top layer there, which looks pretty minging, this layer is black gold, full of worms. That's all their castings, and that's essentially what you're flushing down into this bucket, very diluted worm castings. So these worm castings are hugely nitrogen rich fertilizer. I use this in my seed raising mix, so I'll get a trowel scoop of that, put it in a 2-litre bucket and fill the bucket with water and mix it around so it becomes a slurry, and then put it in a bucket full of potting mix, which makes the potting mix all damp, but it's got the worm castings all through it, and you just mix it in. So the seed raising mix ends up all nice and damp. It's full of bacteria and full of worm poo, which is amazing stuff. The other way I make liquid fertilizer is through compost tea. So you've got my compost bays there, and they're on a slab, and there's a grid at the back of that slab. I put a little plant nursery on top of it, and then had the idea of hooking that up to a bit of, I had some drip line, pipe left over, so I put sprayers on it. So if I turn the tap on, the sprayers keep the compost moist because it gets pretty dry here in summer. That's where I hook it up. And then the liquid makes its way the grid at the bottom just ends in the end of a pipe, and it's just starting to come out now. And I have to clean this pipe out every so often with I just throw a piece of wood up there and turn it around and drag it out. It gets full of sludge, but it's the good kind of sludge, and so I try and harvest as much as I can and put it on the garden. So this tub collects compost wee, which essentially is the same thing almost. It's all the worm castings that end up coming out of that pipe in slurry form, and so that's my other form of liquid fertilizer. So this is my container of compost tea, and I'm going to try and pour a litre in the watering can one-handed. No, all over the floor. So you're not after exact measurements, just rough. Fill it up with a hose. Bubbles are great, if you can see them. Yeah, fill it to the top. Job's a good one. Diluted worm wee, or compost wee, whichever one you're choosing. So I used to do this over my whole garden, which is essentially just this little process on high repeat, which is extremely tedious, hence my need for the IBC. I used to do it in shifts all around the garden, but that's still got on top of me. So in terms of how often I'm doing this with my new veggie plan, I'm trying to do veggie for the kitchen once a week, but I'm not that bothered about doing carrots. Anything ground tuber orientated, it doesn't matter particularly. They can handle not being fed. Things like the brassicas and leafy greens are hungry, they need food, and so yeah, once a week. And then I only do the trees probably once every time I do a comfrey tea brew, which is like once every 2 or 3 months, if that. I'm not fastidious on this at all. And again, after you finish, just make sure you flush any hoses out and stuff. You don't want all that green gunk solidifying in the hose and eventually blocking it up. What started off as a lovely little video on how I do compost tea turned into a behemoth liquid fertilizer in all its forms video, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I will look forward to seeing you next time.